The story of the Americas does not begin with the sails of European ships, but with the silent, monumental forces of the Ice Age. For millennia, the planet was locked in a deep freeze, transforming ocean water into massive continental glaciers. This profound climatic shift created one of the most astonishing geographical features in human history: Beringia, the Great Land Bridge. This vast, exposed plain, once submerged beneath the Bering Strait, connected Siberia and Alaska, laying a wide-open path for the first human migration into a completely new world. Around 15,000 to 25,000 years ago, small, highly resilient bands of hunter-gatherers, tracing their lineage back through Asia, began their epic journey across this tundra corridor. They were not aiming to discover a continent. They were simply following the herds of megafauna, woolly mammoths, giant bison, and caribou that formed the cornerstone of their survival. For these pioneering groups, movement was life. Beringia itself was not a barren, icy wasteland, but a windswept steppe ecosystem, offering sparse vegetation and game, acting as a profound staging ground. A long, isolated chapter in the human saga where the travelers adapted to the frigid environment, honing the skills that would allow them to thrive in the diverse landscapes that lay ahead. As the planet slowly began to warm, the massive ice sheets covering much of North America, the Laurentide and Cordilleran glaciers, began a slow, grinding retreat. This retreat was not uniform, and for a critical period, a pathway, often referred to as the ice-free corridor, opened up through the heart of the continents, running parallel to the Rocky Mountains. While this long-hypothesized route was certainly utilized, modern archaeological evidence increasingly suggests that many of the earliest Americans may have taken a different, even more daring route: the Pacific coastal migration. Imagine these tenacious people navigating the edge of the collapsing ice sheets in skin boats, hopping from island to island along the coast, utilizing the rich marine resources of the Pacific Rim. This kelp highway theory posits a swifter, earlier entry into the continent, allowing groups to bypass the still frozen interior and quickly reach regions like South America. Tools and artifacts found far south, dating back over 14,000 years, such as those at Monte Verde in Chile, strongly support the idea that the first inhabitants were incredibly swift and mobile explorers. The initial crossing of Beringia and the subsequent journeys south, whether by the interior corridor or along the coast, represent one of the most remarkable acts of exploration in human history. These were the true discoverers of the Americas, and their legacy is not just genetic, but environmental. Within a few thousand years, these founding populations diversified, adapted, and spread across every habitable zone, from the Arctic Circle to the Patagonian plains. They transitioned from nomadic big-game hunters to sophisticated builders, farmers, and city dwellers, laying the groundwork for the great civilizations we now study. The mound builders of the Mississippi, the Puebloans of the Southwest, and the countless societies whose complex histories unfolded entirely before Columbus. The journey from Beringia was the crucial first step, a foundational chapter in the human story that transformed an empty landscape into a vibrant, populated world. The incredible journey from Beringia was only the prelude to the vast, complex human drama that unfolded across the American continents. As the descendants of the first travelers spread out, they encountered a scale of ecological and climatic diversity unmatched almost anywhere else on Earth. The land they entered was not a monolithic wilderness, but a mosaic of environments, each demanding unique strategies for survival and rewarding distinct types of cultural development. This geographical reality, a land of diversity, was the fundamental force that shaped the proliferation of hundreds of unique societies, languages, and belief systems long before the arrival of Europeans. Consider the striking contrast between regions. In the Southwest, early inhabitants faced an arid landscape defined by scarce rainfall and intense sunlight. Survival hinged on hydrological genius. Societies like the Ancestral Puebloans and the Hopewell did not simply endure the desert. They engineered it. They developed sophisticated dry farming techniques and intricate canal systems, some running for miles, to divert and manage precious water, allowing them to support large, settled communities characterized by monumental architecture like the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde and the multi-story great houses of Chaco Canyon. Their reliance on agriculture led to highly structured, cooperative societies, where astronomical knowledge was essential for timing the planting cycle. move eastward to the vast, fertile drainage of the Mississippi River Valley. Here, the abundance of water and rich alluvial soil created an environment conducive to massive population centers. The transition from nomadic life to intensive maize agriculture spurred the rise of the Mississippian cultures. This shift was not just about farming. It was about social stratification, spiritual hierarchy, and political power. In cities like Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, we see the culmination of this abundance. A centralized urban center with tens of thousands of residents, dominated by massive, geometrically precise earthen mounds that served as platforms for the homes of elite rulers, the Sun Kings, and as astronomical observatories. This environment fostered a culture focused on trade, warfare, and complex religious ceremonies. Further north and west, life was dictated by different cycles. On the Great Plains, the environment was dominated by immense herds of bison. Societies were organized around movement, hunting, and the utilization of every part of the animal for food, clothing, and shelter. Their relationship with the land was nomadic and cyclical, requiring highly organized communal efforts, like the Pishkun bison jump, for success. Meanwhile, in the resource-rich Pacific Northwest, where towering cedar forests met the sea, marine life and timber provided everything necessary for a sedentary life without large-scale farming. Here, wealth was measured not in fields, but in artistry. Intricately carved totem poles, complex masks, and monumental community houses, giving rise to sophisticated ceremonial practices like the potlatch, which redistributed wealth and affirmed social status. The sheer scale of North America meant that isolation and interaction played out simultaneously. While environmental pressures dictated local cultural traits, trade networks connected distant groups, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and agricultural innovations, like corn, beans, and squash. It was this unparalleled geographical and ecological diversity that set the stage for a continent brimming with unique, autonomous, and thriving human experiments, a testament to human ingenuity in adapting to and shaping every conceivable landscape. The prevailing image of the pre-Columbian Native American is often simplified to the nomadic hunter, spear in hand, perpetually chasing the great herds. While hunting and gathering remained vital to many societies, this stereotype fundamentally obscures one of the most transformative periods in North American history, the development of sophisticated early agricultural innovations. It was the patient, brilliant domestication of wild plants, starting thousands of years ago, that truly allowed indigenous societies to transcend mere survival and lay the foundation for cities, complex governance, and astronomical science. The agricultural revolution in North America was a slow, deliberate process, not a sudden event. It began not with the famed maize, corn, but with the domestication of humble native plants in the eastern woodlands, an area now known as the Eastern Agricultural Complex, EAC. As early as 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, long before the major influence of Mesoamerican crops, people were intentionally cultivating plants like sunflower, specifically for its oily seeds, marsh elder or iva anwa, and various native squashes like the acorn squash. These were not just accidental harvests. These early innovators systematically selected for desirable traits, larger seeds, higher oil content, fundamentally changing the genetics of these plants and binding their destinies to human intervention. This early success provided a stable, storable food source that began to allow populations to settle down, leading directly to the rise of the mound builder cultures like the Adena and Hopewell. The ability to store harvested foods through the lean winter months dramatically reduced the constant pressure of the hunt and freed up human energy for other pursuits, such as monumental construction, elaborate burial rituals, and the establishment of vast trade networks spanning thousands of miles. The true societal tipping point, however, came with the adoption and adaptation of the three sisters: maize, corn, beans, and squash. Originating in Mesoamerica, maize was slowly carried northward, but it required ingenious modification to thrive in the shorter growing seasons and cooler climates of North America. Indigenous farmers spent generations selectively breeding maize varieties, optimizing them to mature quickly and yield greater harvests. The introduction of the full Three Sisters complex was a masterpiece of sustainable agroecology. This system was not just about growing three crops, it was about planting them in symbiotic harmony. The sturdy corn stalks provided a natural trellis for the climbing bean vines. The beans, as legumes, fixed essential nitrogen into the soil, naturally fertilizing the heavy-feeding corn. The broad, low-growing squash leaves created a natural ground cover, suppressing weeds and retaining critical soil moisture. This polyculture approach was infinitely more sustainable and productive than single-crop farming, providing a highly nutritious, complete diet that was rich in carbohydrates, proteins, and vitamins. By mastering this system, groups like the Iroquois in the Northeast and the Mississippians in the Southeast could support populations numbering in the tens of thousands. Agriculture transformed their social structure from small, mobile kin groups into permanent, village-based communities, allowing for specialization of labor, the development of sophisticated political systems like the Iroquois Confederacy, and the concentration of wealth and power that fueled the monumental architectural achievements that dot the continent today. These early agriculturalists were not merely survivors. They were environmental engineers who fundamentally reshaped the landscape and the course of human society in North America. Long before the era of European exploration, the fertile valleys of the Ohio River were the center of a flourishing and profoundly mysterious civilization known collectively as the Mound Builders. This name encompasses a succession of complex societies, but two in particular stand out for their monumental earthen architecture, sophisticated artistry, and enigmatic rituals: the Adena and the Hopewell. Their existence utterly refutes the idea that pre-Columbian North America was populated only by simple, scattered bands. Instead, these groups built thriving centers that demonstrate an impressive command of labor, mathematics, and spiritual belief. The Adena culture, emerging around 1000 BCE and lasting until roughly 200 BCE, represents the foundational phase of mound building. While their villages were small and dispersed, their monumental efforts were concentrated in large, conical earthen mounds, often reaching impressive heights. These mounds were primarily burial structures, serving as final resting places for key community members, suggesting a degree of social ranking and reverence for the dead. Within these sacred hills, archaeologists have uncovered intricate artifacts, engraved stone tablets, polished stone tools, and sophisticated copper jewelry that speak to the Adena people's skill and their deep engagement with cosmology. The labor required to move tons of earth, often carried in baskets and compacted layer by layer, signifies a cohesive society capable of organizing large-scale public works dedicated to spiritual rather than purely practical ends. Following the Adena and building upon their traditions came the remarkable Hopewell culture, which flourished spectacularly between about 200 BCE and 500 CE. The Hopewell marked a significant escalation in both architectural scale and cultural complexity. They are perhaps best known not just for conical burial mounds, but for vast, breathtaking geometric earthworks. Sites like the Newark Earthworks in Ohio, a UNESCO World Heritage candidate, feature immense squares, circles, and octagons, some covering dozens of acres, all built with astonishing precision. These enclosures were often aligned with significant astronomical events, suggesting the Hopewell possessed advanced knowledge of celestial cycles and mathematics. The sheer scale and geometric exactitude of these public spaces imply that they served as major ceremonial centers, perhaps drawing pilgrims and participants from hundreds of miles away. The Hopewell's influence extended far beyond the Ohio Valley through a sophisticated trading network known as the Hopewell Interaction Sphere. Far-flung exotic materials found in their mounds reveal the extent of their connections. Copper from the Great Lakes, obsidian, volcanic glass from the Rocky Mountains, mica from the Appalachian Mountains, and shells and shark teeth from the Gulf Coast. These materials were transformed by Hopewell artisans into exquisite, highly stylized artworks, particularly in copper repoussé, carved stone pipes, and effigy figures, which likely served as symbols of status or ritual objects. Yet despite their cultural brilliance, both the Adena and Hopewell faded into archaeological silence. The Hopewell centers declined around 500 CE, and their monumental construction ceased. The people did not vanish, but their culture dispersed, perhaps due to climatic stress, population pressure, or shifts in spiritual and political organization. The legacy of the Adena and Hopewell, however, endures in the hundreds of massive earthworks that still scar the landscape. A silent, powerful testament to complex societies that harnessed organizational power, artistic genius, and spiritual devotion to create monuments that predate the medieval castles of Europe, challenging the historical narrative of the American continent. gazing across the Mississippi River from present-day St. Louis. It is nearly impossible to imagine that the vast, fertile floodplain known as the American Bottom once hosted the largest, most sophisticated urban center in North America north of Mexico. This was Cahokia, a true pre-Columbian metropolis, which, at its zenith around 1050 to 1350 CE, challenged the size and complexity of major European cities of its time. Cahokia was not merely a large village. It was the capital of the dominant Mississippian culture, a political and religious hub governed by a powerful, likely hereditary, ruling class often referred to by archaeologists as the Sun Kings. Cahokia's foundation was built on agricultural genius, the mastery of the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, which produced massive surpluses that could support a non-farming population of up to 20,000 people within the city limits, and tens of thousands more in surrounding satellite towns. This intense centralization of people and resources fueled monumental construction on an unprecedented scale. The city was defined by its incredible earthen mounds, over 120 of which were built entirely by human labor, using baskets to carry and compact millions of cubic feet of dirt. Dominating the urban landscape was Monk's Mound, the central architectural marvel. Covering over 14 acres and rising in 4 terraces to a height of nearly 100 feet, it is the largest prehistoric earthwork in the Americas. This mound did not serve as a burial site, but as a colossal platform for the residence and temple of the supreme leader, the Sun King. The structure's height symbolized the ruler's proximity to the divine and his elevated status above the populace, reinforcing a rigid social hierarchy where political and spiritual power were interwoven. The massive plaza at its base served as a stage for major public ceremonies, feasts, and ritual games, drawing residents and pilgrims from across the sprawling Mississippian sphere. Cahokia was a highly organized, cosmopolitan center. The city was strategically located near the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers, making it a critical choke point for trade. Exotic goods flowed in from vast distances: copper from the Great Lakes, Gulf Coast shells, and high-quality stone from the Ozark Mountains. Archaeological evidence, including analysis of ancient teeth, suggests that Cahokia was a melting pot, with a substantial portion of its population having immigrated from distant regions, drawn by the city's economic power and religious significance. Further demonstrating the Cahokians' sophistication were the large, circular solar calendars, known as woodhenges, constructed of massive timber posts outside the main plaza. These structures were used to precisely track the solstices and equinoxes, crucial for governing agricultural cycles and religious festivals. The subsequent construction of a massive wooden palisade around the city's central core suggests that by the 12th century, internal conflicts or external threats were rising. By the 14th century, environmental strain, political instability, and possibly disease led to the city's gradual abandonment. Yet, Cahokia's legacy as America's first city and the capital of the mighty Mississippian culture remains a powerful testament to the advanced civilization that thrived in the heartland of North America. Standing on a high plateau overlooking Ohio's Brush Creek Valley lies one of the most enigmatic and visually stunning artifacts of North America's ancient past, the Great Serpent Mound. Unlike the geometric enclosures or massive platform mounds of Cahokia and the Hopewell centers, this spectacular effigy mound does not serve as a burial site or a residential platform. Instead, it is a colossal, winding artistic and spiritual statement, built in the shape of a massive, uncoiling serpent. It is a work of earth and labor that embodies astronomical knowledge, profound cosmological beliefs, and a mastery of the landscape. The serpent mound stretches over 1,348 feet long, making it the longest effigy mound in the world. Its body coils in 7 distinct loops, culminating in an oval head that appears to swallow an egg or a sun, depending on interpretation. The precise cultural origins of the mound remain a subject of intense debate. While it was initially attributed to the Hopewell culture due to its proximity to their sites, current archaeological evidence strongly suggests it was constructed much later, likely by people of the Fort Ancient culture around 1070 CE. Coincidentally, the same period when Cahokia was experiencing its rapid expansion. Regardless of its exact builders, the mound stands as a powerful, singular expression of indigenous North American thought. The genius of the Serpent Mound lies not just in its immense size, but in its perfect integration with its environment and the cosmos. Its orientation is far from random. Sophisticated surveying has confirmed that the serpent's curves and the axis of its head are aligned with significant solar and lunar events. The head and the coiling body precisely mark the positions of the sunrises and sunsets on the summer and winter solstices. This astronomical alignment indicates that the mound served a vital function as a massive, immobile calendar, allowing the builders to track the seasons, predict planting and harvest times, and anchor their spiritual ceremonies to the celestial cycles. The meaning of the serpent effigy itself is deeply rooted in indigenous cosmology. The snake, or serpent, is a recurring and powerful symbol across many Native American cultures, often representing the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth, as well as the flow of water and the underworld. The head, with its open mouth encompassing the oval, is widely interpreted as symbolizing the sun, the earth, or the moment of cosmic creation or renewal, a perpetual struggle or union between earthly and celestial forces. To walk its length is to literally traverse a sacred narrative woven into the earth itself. The Great Serpent Mound is a rare and precious insight into the non-utilitarian, sacred architecture of ancient North America. It signifies a society that possessed the organizational skill to execute a massive, multi-year construction project, and more importantly, a cultural framework that prioritized the expression of spiritual beliefs and astronomical observation over immediate practical needs. It is a powerful, silent sentinel that continues to remind visitors of the sophisticated, deeply reflective worldviews of the people who shaped the continent centuries before the arrival of outsiders. In the stark, high-desert landscape where the borders of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah meet, a region famously known as the Four Corners, a highly resilient and deeply spiritual civilization took root. These were the Ancestral Puebloans, often historically, and controversially referred to as the Anasazi, a people whose ingenuity allowed them to thrive in an environment that seemed determined to deny human settlement. Their story is a remarkable chronicle of architectural evolution, shifting spiritual practices, and ultimately, a great migration, perfectly encapsulated by their dramatic transition from subterranean pit houses to the breathtaking, fortified dwellings of Mesa Verde. The earliest phase of the ancestral Puebloan life, dating back over 2,000 years, was characterized by the basket-maker tradition. These communities were semi-nomadic, utilizing shallow, temporary shelters but increasingly relying on stored maize, beans, and squash. The first permanent dwellings they constructed were the pit houses, circular or rectangular homes dug into the earth and roofed with wood and mud. These structures were practical, using the earth's natural insulation to stay cool in the brutal summer and warm in the freezing winter. The pit house was more than just a shelter. It held deep symbolic significance, often featuring a small hole in the floor called the sipapu, which represented the mythical point of emergence from the underworld. As their agricultural practices improved and populations grew, the Puebloans began to build above ground, leading to the development of the Pueblo architecture. These early multi-room structures, often built of stone and adobe, were communal complexes known as pueblos. This shift marks a dramatic increase in social complexity and cooperation. It was during this period, around 900 to 1150 CE, that the great centers of culture and commerce, like Chaco Canyon, reached their zenith. However, the most iconic and dramatic phase of their architectural history unfolded across the canyon lands, most famously at Mesa Verde. Beginning around 1190 CE, the Puebloans undertook a stunning, monumental change. They abandoned the mesa-top settlements and began constructing immense, multi-story masonry villages tucked into massive, protective alcoves beneath the towering cliff faces. These cliff dwellings, sites like Cliff Palace, Balcony House, and Spruce Tree House, were masterpieces of defensive architecture. Constructed from shaped stone blocks held together with clay mortar, these structures were complex, often containing over 100 interconnected rooms, storage areas, and multiple subterranean kivas. The kiva, evolving from the earlier pit house, remained the spiritual heart of the Puebloan community. These circular, semi-subterranean chambers were used exclusively for ceremonies and political meetings, emphasizing the continuity of their deep cosmological beliefs despite the dramatic change in their physical living arrangements. The move into the cliffs, an arduous task that required immense communal effort, was likely a response to a combination of factors. increasing social stress, perhaps resource competition, and most critically, a severe and prolonged drought that began in the late 13th century. By 1300 CE, the great cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde were emptied. The ancestral Puebloans did not vanish. Rather, they dispersed southward and eastward, migrating to the Rio Grande Valley and the Little Colorado River basin. Here, they merged with existing groups and continued their traditions, becoming the ancestors of the modern Pueblo peoples, the Hopi, Zuni, and others, whose resilient culture still honors the ingenuity and spiritual legacy of the cliff dwellers. Deep within the arid, remote San Juan Basin of northwestern New Mexico lies Chaco Canyon, a testament to the extraordinary organizational power, engineering skill, and astronomical knowledge of the ancestral Puebloans. Between 850 and 1150 CE, this harsh, high-desert canyon transformed into the intellectual, ceremonial, and commercial capital of the entire Four Corners region. Chaco was not just a village. It was a regional center that coordinated a vast network spanning thousands of square miles, driven by the construction of monumental structures known as the Great Houses. These great houses, such as Pueblo Bonito, Chetroquetl, and Pueblo Alto, were architectural achievements unparalleled in their time. They were massive, multi-story complexes built of expertly shaped sandstone blocks and timbers imported from distant mountain ranges. Pueblo Bonito, the largest, once contained over 650 rooms and dozens of circular, ceremonial chambers called kivas. The construction was planned and executed on a massive scale, demonstrating a centralized authority capable of coordinating enormous labor forces and managing complex logistics. The alignment of these buildings with cardinal directions and solar-lunar cycles strongly suggests a deliberate, ceremonial landscape rooted in advanced astronomical observation. What truly distinguished Chaco Canyon was its function as a hub of commerce and communication. Radiating outward from the canyon were over 400 miles of straight, engineered roads. These roads, ranging from 15 to 30 feet wide, were often constructed over difficult terrain without deviation, suggesting they served a ceremonial or regulatory purpose beyond simple transportation. They connected the canyon to over 150 distant, smaller communities known as outliers, creating a unified socio-political and economic sphere. Through this network flowed exotic goods, including turquoise from distant mines, which was fashioned into jewelry and ritual objects, macaws and copper bells from Mesoamerica, and pottery unique to the Chaco system. The inhabitants of Chaco, or at least the elite who resided in the great houses, possessed remarkable astronomical sophistication. The most famous example is the Sun Dagger petroglyph site, Fajada Butte, where shafts of sunlight perfectly bisected spirals carved into the rock face during the summer solstice. Furthermore, the alignments of certain great houses with the 18.6-year lunar standstill cycle reveal a profound and long-term commitment to celestial observation, knowledge that was likely central to the society's spiritual practices and the maintenance of their political authority. The scale of the buildings and the density of the artifacts suggest that Chaco Canyon served not as a primary residential city for tens of thousands, but perhaps as a ritual and pilgrimage center. Many great houses appear to have been used primarily for storage or seasonal ceremonies rather than permanent mass habitation. They functioned as treasuries, sacred meeting grounds, and symbols of the regional power and cosmic connection of the ancestral Puebloan leaders. Around 1130 CE, following a decades-long drought and increasing environmental stress, the coordinated activity in Chaco Canyon sharply declined. The massive network fractured, and the great houses were slowly abandoned. The power shifted away from the canyon, leading to the establishment of new centers in areas like Mesa Verde, and eventually fueling the migration that resulted in the formation of the modern Pueblo nations. Chaco Canyon remains a spectacular, silent witness to one of the most brilliant and complex prehistoric societies in North America. While the ancestral Puebloans engineered settlements into cliffs and canyons, another distinct and equally brilliant civilization flourished far to the south, mastering an even more challenging environment. The intense heat and arid landscape of the Sonoran Desert in what is now central Arizona. These were the Hohokam, a name derived from a Pima word meaning, those who have vanished, a society whose enduring legacy is one of the most sophisticated feats of water management in the entire prehistoric world. They were the ultimate desert farmers, transforming a hostile environment into a fertile agricultural heartland through sheer ingenuity. The story of the Hohokam, which stretches from roughly 300 CE to 1450 CE, is intrinsically linked to the Salt and Gila rivers. Their survival hinged not on relying on unpredictable rainfall, but on controlling and distributing the precious river water through an immense network of irrigation canals. This system was their defining achievement. Imagine a civilization, without metal tools or the wheel, excavating hundreds of miles of deep, wide canals using only stone implements and woven baskets. At their peak, the Hohokam maintained an estimated 1,000 miles of main canals and laterals, with some primary channels measuring up to 10 feet deep and 30 feet wide. This hydraulic engineering allowed the Hohokam to support a dense, centralized population and cultivate multiple harvests each year. Their primary crops were the ubiquitous Three Sisters, maize, beans, and squash, but they also successfully grew cotton, which they used to weave intricate textiles for trade and dress. The control and maintenance of such a vast, cooperative water system required a highly organized, stable social and political structure, underscoring the level of coordination achieved by these ancient desert dwellers. Hohokam communities were centered on large villages, such as the impressive site of Snaketown. These settlements featured residential groupings of wattle and daub houses, but also contained key communal structures. One notable architectural feature was the presence of large platform mounds, similar in function, if not scale to those found in the Mississippian culture, suggesting a developing social hierarchy. Another unique and enduring mystery is the presence of numerous ball courts, massive oval depressions used for ceremonial games, which bear a striking resemblance to those found in Mesoamerican cultures to the south. This suggests a direct and sustained influence or interaction with ancient Mexican societies, likely through extensive trade routes. Their artistic expression was distinctive, particularly their mastery of ceramics and etching. Hohokam artisans perfected a unique technique of acid etching shell and bone, a method not seen again until the modern industrial age to create intricate ornaments. They also produced large quantities of buff-colored pottery decorated with red slip, often featuring dynamic, geometric, and zoomorphic designs. Despite centuries of prosperity and their mastery over the desert environment, the Hohokam culture began a gradual decline around 1350 CE. Possible causes include shifts in river flow, the gradual salinization of the soil caused by long-term irrigation, internal conflict, or perhaps a prolonged drought. By 1450 CE, the major settlements were abandoned, and the intricate canal system fell into disuse. However, the legacy of the Hohokam did not truly vanish. They are considered the direct ancestors of the modern Wadem, Pima, and Tohono Wadem peoples, who inherited and, in some cases, rebuilt parts of the ancient canal systems, ensuring that the wisdom of the desert farmers survived into the modern era. In stark contrast to the desert farmers of the Hohokam or the maize agriculturists of the Mississippian world, the indigenous societies of the Pacific Northwest coast, a lush, temperate region stretching from southern Alaska down through British Columbia and into Oregon and Washington, developed a culture centered not on farming, but on the exploitation of unparalleled natural abundance. This environment, dominated by towering cedar forests and oceans teeming with life, fostered a unique, hierarchical society where the accumulation of wealth, the mastery of art, and the elaborate display of prestige through potlatch ceremonies were the defining features of life. The key to the Pacific Northwest's cultural success was the salmon. The annual return of these fish to the coastal rivers provided a massive, predictable, and easily harvestable protein source. Combined with the abundance of marine mammals, whales, seals, shellfish, and the ease of preserving this food through smoking, these groups, including the Haida, Kwakiutl, Kwakwakawakwa, and Tlingit, were able to sustain large, permanent, and often hereditary village populations without dedicating effort to daily farming. This stable food base freed up immense time and resources, which were instead channeled into social organization, warfare, and most famously, artistic expression. Their deep connection to the giant cedar trees, the tree of life, is evident in nearly every aspect of their material culture. From cedar, they constructed massive, multi-family plank houses, large, highly seaworthy canoes capable of deep-sea travel and trade, and most visually striking, the intricate totem poles. These poles were not objects of worship, but monumental works of heraldry and history, carved with stylized animal and human forms representing a family's lineage, crests, and historical narratives. The artistry was not just decorative, it was a powerful statement of identity and inherited rank. Society was rigidly stratified, built upon the foundation of wealth, which was accumulated through successful resource exploitation, raids, and trade. Chiefs and high-ranking families controlled the best fishing spots and managed the community's resources. Their prestige was not simply measured by having wealth, but by the spectacular, ritualistic act of giving it away during the potlatch ceremony. The potlatch was a complex, essential institution, a massive multi-day feast and ceremony that served as a public affirmation of status, inheritance, or significant life events, like a marriage or the naming of a new chief. The host chief would spend years accumulating vast quantities of goods, blankets, preserved food, copper shields, known as coppers, and carved items, only to distribute them all among the guests. A chief's power was demonstrated by how much he could give away, and the amount given determined the prestige of the recipient. It was an economic and political mechanism that stabilized social relations, validated claims to titles, and ritually redistributed wealth across the community. The culture of the Pacific Northwest coast was a shining example of how a non-agricultural society could achieve immense social complexity, monumental art, and political organization simply by mastering the bounty of a rich environment. Their enduring artistic legacy and sophisticated ceremonial life stand as a powerful reminder of the diverse paths to civilization taken by the first peoples of North America. In the dense forests and river valleys of the Northeast, spanning what is now upstate New York and parts of the Great Lakes region, a political experiment of profound complexity and influence took root long before the European notion of democracy reached American shores. This was the Iroquois Confederacy, or Haudenosaunee, people of the Longhouse, a groundbreaking union that replaced cycles of warfare with a formalized structure dedicated to the principles of peace and power. This union was not merely a military alliance. It was a sophisticated, constitutional government that would later indirectly influence the formation of the United States itself. The Confederacy was founded by tradition through the efforts of two near-mythical figures, the great peacemaker Daganoweda and his spokesman Hiawatha. Around the 12th century, though estimates vary, these leaders sought to end the brutal, ceaseless warfare among 5 distinct, linguistically related nations: the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. The solution they proposed was a governmental system guided by the Great Law of Peace, Gay and Ashagawa. This law established a constitutional framework that bound the nations together into a unified, powerful entity. The core of the Iroquois system was its decentralized yet highly structured government. It was ruled by a grand council of 50 male chiefs, or sachems, who were chosen not by heredity alone, but by a council of clan mothers, the senior women of the matrilineal Iroquois society. The clan mothers held immense political power. They were responsible for nominating and impeaching the sachems, acting as the ultimate checks and balances within the system. This power structure reflected the fundamental role of women in Iroquois society, where lineage, property, and agricultural production were controlled through the female line. The Great Law of Peace established a sophisticated process for consensus building and conflict resolution. The 5 nations had specific duties and seating arrangements in the Grand Council, often utilizing a two-side-of-the-fire debating format. For instance, the Seneca and Mohawk, the older brothers, would debate an issue first. Then the Oneida and Cayuga, the younger brothers, would consider the same issue. Finally, the Onondaga, the firekeepers, whose territory lay in the center and whose chiefs held the responsibility for maintaining the central wampum records, would offer the final judgment, often breaking a tie or ensuring true consensus was reached. This process was designed to be slow, deliberate, and exhaustive, ensuring that decisions were stable and represented the unified will of the Confederacy. The Confederacy's political cohesion translated into immense military and diplomatic power. By the 17th century, the Haudenosaunee had become the dominant indigenous power in the Northeast, controlling key trade routes and successfully engaging in the lucrative fur trade. Their unity gave them leverage in dealing with the encroaching French and English powers, allowing them to play one colonial power against the other for decades. The Iroquois Confederacy stands as a profound model of democratic organization. Predating the European Enlightenment, and demonstrating a highly effective system of governance that prioritized unity, political checks and balances, and the empowerment of women. Their enduring symbol, the Longhouse, represented both their physical dwellings and the political shelter that covered all 5 unified nations under the Great Tree of Peace. Stretching from the Rocky Mountains eastward to the deciduous forests, the Great Plains of North America offered a landscape of immense, sweeping grasslands, a challenging environment whose very vastness dictated a unique way of life. For millennia before the introduction of the horse fundamentally transformed their existence, the people of the plains developed complex, adaptable cultures centered around 2 crucial elements: movement and the massive herds of bison, often called buffalo. This era of early communal hunting defined the ingenuity and deep environmental knowledge of the region's first inhabitants. In the pre-horse era, before the mid-17th century, life on the plains demanded a nuanced balance between mobility and the pursuit of resources. These early plains groups were masters of pedestrian movement, utilizing dogs, dog travois, to help transport their belongings. While some groups on the eastern periphery engaged in limited, stable agriculture, the vast majority of those living in the heartland were highly mobile, following the migrations of the great bison herds, a resource so central that it shaped their spiritual beliefs, social structure, and technology. The primary challenge was not finding the bison, but successfully and safely killing enough of the massive, fast-moving animals to sustain the entire community. This required sophisticated planning and immense communal hunting efforts. The most effective method devised by these early hunters was the bison jump, or pishkun. The pishkun was a monumental logistical effort. First, runners would locate a large herd grazing near a suitable cliff or steep drop-off. Then a large group of people, men, women, and children, would work in concert, using noisemakers, cloaks, and carefully constructed drive lines of stones and brush to stampede the herd toward the designated killing site. The noise and confusion would panic the animals, causing them to plunge over the edge to their deaths. This method provided a massive, instantaneous surplus of meat, hides, and bone, far more than could be achieved by individual hunting. The sheer scale of the operation underscores a highly organized society capable of intense cooperation and centralized leadership for the duration of the hunt. Following a successful jump, the entire community would relocate to the processing site below the cliff, turning the carcass into every conceivable utility. No part was wasted. The meat was consumed fresh or preserved as pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries. The hides were used for clothing and tipi covers. Bones were fashioned into tools, and organs were used for food or containers. The bison was, literally, the source of life, culture, and survival across the plains. Another prevalent hunting technique was the buffalo pound or corral. Built from timber and brush, these enclosures were strategically camouflaged. Hunters would lure or drive smaller herds into the pound where they could be contained and dispatched efficiently. This method, often used in less rugged terrain, still required the same level of communal synchronization and discipline as the bison jump. The reliance on bison and the necessity of communal organization resulted in a fluid social structure that prized adaptability, hunting prowess, and cooperative spirit. These early plains societies, ancestors to groups like the Blackfoot, Crow, and Cheyenne, were not defined by great cities or permanent architecture, but by their intimate, profound understanding of the cyclical movements of nature and the shared necessity of the hunt. Their ingenuity allowed human populations to thrive in the massive interior of the continent, proving that sophisticated civilization could be built not just on stone and farming, but on grass, great herds, and the power of human coordination. The historical narrative often compartmentalizes pre-Columbian North American civilizations. The mound builders here, the Puebloans there, the coastal peoples on the margin. However, this view fundamentally misrepresents a crucial aspect of the continent's ancient history: the extent to which these seemingly disparate societies were connected through vibrant, long-distance trade routes that facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and shared knowledge. North America was not a collection of isolated islands, but a sophisticated, interconnected native world, linked by footpaths, river canoes, and a common understanding of reciprocal exchange. These trade networks functioned as the arteries of the continent, proving that commerce thrived across vast distances centuries before European contact. For instance, the Hopewell interaction sphere, centered in the Ohio Valley, provides powerful evidence of this interconnectedness. In Hopewellian burial mounds, archaeologists have unearthed materials sourced from geographically extreme locations. Copper from the shores of Lake Superior, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, mica, a glittering mineral from the Appalachian Mountains, and massive conch shells and shark teeth from the Gulf Coast. This vast exchange was not simply about economics. These exotic materials were primarily used for ceremonial objects and high-status adornment, suggesting a shared ritual language and a network of traveling priests, chiefs, or specialized traders. Similarly, in the arid Southwest, the rise of Chaco Canyon was fundamentally dependent on trade. Turquoise, mined near present-day Santa Fe, became the currency of power and spirituality, flowing northward through the Chaco Road network and southward into Mesoamerica. In return, Chaco received highly prized goods like colorful macaws for their feathers and copper bells, linking the Pueblo world directly to cultures in central and southern Mexico. This suggests not just trade, but deep diplomatic or ritual relationships. Beyond material goods, these routes were critical conduits for shared knowledge. The most important intellectual exchange was the diffusion of agricultural techniques. Maize, originally domesticated in Mexico, was gradually adapted and transported thousands of miles northward, leading to the agricultural revolutions in the Mississippian and Northeast regions. Similarly, innovations in pottery styles, basket weaving, and even governmental ideas, such as the concepts of council governance and diplomacy, spread through the interaction of traveling peoples. For example, the highly organized political structure of the Iroquois Confederacy may have been influenced by concepts encountered during long-distance exchanges with neighbors. Furthermore, river systems served as natural highways. The Mississippi River and its tributaries formed a massive water-based trade highway, connecting the plains hunters to the sophisticated city-states of the Mississippian culture, like Cahokia, and linking them ultimately to the Gulf Coast. Bison hides moved south, salt, pottery, and shells moved north. Along the northwest coast, massive cedar canoes facilitated coastal trade, moving goods like oil, preserved fish, and cedar planks across hundreds of miles, reinforcing political and familial ties through ceremonial exchanges like the potlatch. The history of these trade routes paints a picture of a dynamic, interacting continent where cultural isolation was rare. The movement of goods and ideas ensured that innovations spread, crises were managed, sometimes by migration along known routes, and a common, though regionally diverse, American worldview persisted. A complex and connected world that was already ancient and vibrant when European newcomers finally arrived. By the year 1491, just prior to the seismic shift that would forever alter the continent's trajectory, North America was a land of profound paradox. Ancient yet dynamic, decentralized yet highly populated, and deeply traditional yet continually evolving. This was the fateful threshold, a moment when hundreds of diverse, thriving indigenous nations stood on the cusp of an encounter that none could have predicted. A moment that abruptly ended a history spanning thousands of autonomous years. Contrary to the European myth of a virgin wilderness, the continent was, in reality, a meticulously managed and densely occupied landscape. The massive abandonment of centers like Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and Cahokia centuries earlier did not lead to a depopulated void. Rather, it initiated a period of powerful reorganization and consolidation. The descendants of the great city builders had adapted, migrating to new areas to form the resilient and recognizable nations that Europeans would soon encounter. In the Northeast, the Iroquois Confederacy had formalized its powerful political union, ruling a significant territory and controlling crucial interior trade routes, standing ready to navigate the coming colonial rivalries. To the east, Algonquian-speaking groups like the Powhatan and the Wampanoag were established in coastal villages, managing the forests and rivers through controlled burning and sophisticated fishing techniques, often utilizing large, multi-family longhouses. In the southeast, the traditions of the Mississippian culture had evolved into the powerful, hierarchical chiefdoms of the Muskogee, Creek, Cherokee, and Natchez. These groups lived in organized towns, often still centered around ceremonial mounds, continuing to practice intensive maize agriculture and maintaining complex social structures. Their societies were flourishing, utilizing the rich environment to build stable, often fortified communities. Out west, The descendants of the ancestral Puebloans had successfully established the resilient Pueblo communities along the Rio Grande, such as Acoma and Taos. Here they had perfected a sustainable way of life, a profound synthesis of irrigation farming and permanent, multi-story architecture, maintaining their spiritual heart, the kiva, while resisting the arid environment. Meanwhile, the mobile nations of the Great Plains were beginning to acquire the escaped Spanish horses, a technological adoption that was about to unleash a new era of nomadic hunting prowess, forever changing their power and range. Crucially, the populations of 1491 were not static. The continent had been shaped by human hands for millennia. Forests were managed, prairies were burned to enhance hunting, and coastlines were exploited sustainably. The air was likely often smoky from widespread environmental management fires, and the land was crossed by an extensive network of footpaths and trade routes, creating a profound, if unseen, web of interaction. This was the world poised at the threshold, a continent of vibrant, diverse, and independent political entities, unaware that a geological boundary was about to be crossed, bringing with it not just new people and new technology, but devastating new diseases, measles, influenza, and smallpox, against which they had no immunity. It was the moment of peak indigenous strength and cultural diversity, facing a biological and military storm that would, within a few generations, tragically depopulate and destabilize the most powerful civilizations, opening the way for European dominance. The world of 1491 was full, complex, and utterly unsuspecting of the catastrophe about to unfold. The arrival of Europeans fundamentally reshaped the North American continent, yet the subsequent centuries of colonization, conflict, and displacement did not erase the foundational role and lasting power of the indigenous societies. The immense and diverse contributions of the continent's first peoples, from their agricultural brilliance and political thought to their deep ecological wisdom, constitute a legacy not lost, a permanent influence woven into the very fabric of modern American life that deserves to be honored. Perhaps the most tangible legacy lies in the realm of agriculture and sustenance. When European settlers struggled to adapt to the new environments, they were saved and sustained by indigenous crops and farming techniques. The Three Sisters, corn, maize, beans, and squash, were not merely adopted. They became staples of the global diet, permanently changing world history. Furthermore, indigenous peoples domesticated or utilized countless other crops, including potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, peanuts, and chocolate, fundamentally shaping the world's food supply. Without the agricultural innovations developed by the ancestors of the Mississippians and Puebloans, the colonization of the Americas would have taken a vastly different and far more challenging course. Beyond food, the influence extends to democratic and political thought. The highly sophisticated and enduring Iroquois Confederacy, with its complex system of checks and balances, decentralized power, and commitment to achieving consensus through structured debate, served as a tangible, living example of republican governance. Many historians and political scientists argue that the Confederacy's structure was known to the Founding Fathers, providing a pragmatic, indigenous model that influenced the debates over the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution itself. The ideals of unity through mutual respect and defined rights, enshrined in the Iroquois Great Law of Peace, echo across the centuries. The environmental and geographical legacy is equally pervasive. The network of indigenous trails and trade routes that crisscross the continent became the initial pathways for European exploration and settlement, often evolving into modern highways and state boundaries. Moreover, the very language of the landscape is imbued with indigenous history. Half of the U.S. states and countless cities, rivers, and features derive their names from Native American languages, e.g., Massachusetts, Chicago, Mississippi, Alaska. These names serve as permanent reminders of the people who first named and understood these lands. Finally, there is the enduring ecological wisdom. For thousands of years, indigenous groups managed the continent, employing sophisticated methods like controlled burning to maintain healthy ecosystems and enhance biodiversity, practices now being relearned and adopted by modern forest and wildlife management agencies. This traditional ecological knowledge, tech offers invaluable lessons on sustainability, resource management, and the cyclical relationship between humanity and the natural world, sharply contrasting with the extractive, short-term approaches introduced by colonization. The legacy of the first Americans is not confined to history books or archaeological sites. It is in our fields, our political ideals, our language, and our ecological consciousness. Honoring this influence means recognizing the incredible resilience of modern indigenous nations and acknowledging that American history, and the world's, was profoundly shaped by the ingenuity and complex societies that flourished before Columbus.